Yeah, so before we move to talking about the organic standards, as happens a lot in this class, I listen to the news and then something pops up. And I'm like, oh, that has to do with something we were talking about in class. So yesterday, I was listening to the news and this article came on, NPR, about some recent research. Keep in mind, I have not gone and looked up this research yet, so this is just an unfiltered news report. And there are certain things that I disagree with in terms of the language that the person being interviewed uses. But since we were just talking about the ethics of eating meat, I thought this was an interesting news story. So as you listen to this, I want you to pay attention to the way this person uses the word feeling versus sensing, because that's an important distinction in my mind that I don't know that this researcher is paying as close attention to as perhaps I would like him to be. So, see if I can get this to play where you can hear it.
Carry on living for 2 to 3 minutes when it's dropped into kind of boiling.
Go back.
And then hey, and from the top, host Guy Raz invites you to listen in as he talks to the visionary leaders of some of the world's
I don't care about visionary leaders.
Click the play
I just don't care.
to hear a recent episode. Support for NPR comes from Airbnb. Do you have questions about whether hosting might be right for you? You can now get free one-on-one help from experienced hosts. Go to airbnb.com/askasuperhost.
Live from NPR News, I'm Corva Coleman. Hundreds of demonstrators are expected outside the Supreme Court today. The justice.
If you've ever cooked a
Here we
lobster,
go.
the traditional method is dropping it into boiling water alive.
Yeah, conventional wisdom is that that's the most hygienic way to cook them, and also that lobsters don't feel any pain. A new study from the UK says otherwise.
There's evidence that a lobster will carry on living for 2 to 3 minutes when it's dropped into a pan of boiling water, and that the nervous system response carries on very intensely during that time, just as it would with you or me or a cat or a dog or any animal dropped into a pan of boiling water.
That's Dr. Jonathan Birch, Associate Professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He led the study and looked at a whole range of mollusks and crustacea to see if they were sentient. In other words, if they were animals that could feel sensation.
And it wasn't just lobsters. They looked at octopi, squid, crabs, even shrimp, and it turns out all of them can feel.
We drew on over 300 scientific studies looking at various different types of evidence, with a particular focus on evidence for pain. Not because pain is all that matters. In fact, all feelings matter, including feelings of pleasure and joy and so on. But pain has been the most studied because it does have this special significance for animal welfare.
Birch and his team recommended more humane ways of dealing with these creatures, from the catching to the cooking, things like specialized knife techniques.
And this whole thing has prompted the British government to include them in an animal welfare bill that could mean changes to the laws in the future.
I don't expect anything to happen quickly in this area, but I think if we start a conversation now, if we draw this line in the sand that says, from now on we're going to think of these animals as sentient beings, that then starts a conversation about what that means and what it is to treat these animals humanely. And that's the conversation we wanted the report to start.
Birch hopes this move alters the way we regard all invertebrate animals in the future.
So there's this general idea that invertebrates don't feel pain, don't sense pain. And so feeling and sensing to me are related but different. I forget which one of you guys asked me, if I thought certain organisms could feel pain or not. And my answer to you was basically I suspect that anything that has a nervous system can sense pain. And so sensing pain is all about nerve function in my mind. The way this particular researcher is using the word feeling this is, to me, about neural processing in whatever nerve aggregation is the brain. It's the difference between tasting sugar and having a nerve fire and sending a message to your brain versus your brain interpreting that as sweetness. There's nothing inherent in a sugar molecule that makes a sugar molecule sweet. It's just a molecular structure. There's nothing objective about sucrose being sweet. That particular chemical compound, that particular chemical structure might elicit a very different sensation in another organism. Another organism might perceive that as bitter in reality. What makes sucrose sweet is our brain's interpretation of those neural signals that are triggered by our taste buds coming into contact with that particular molecule. So sensing is, to me, about nerve function, and so I suspect any organism that has nerves that you cut into is going to send neural impulses to the brain. The feeling that this researcher talks about is then going to be about how that brain is processing the information. And so as you think about that chapter dealing with the ethics of eating meat, you know, once again, what I said earlier in the semester about, we can have whatever bill it was about, I suspect that anything that is capable of nerve impulse transmission is probably also capable of feeling pain, and now there's some research that kind of bears that out. Questions about that? Okay. I asked you guys to go and look up the organic standards on the U.S. Department of Agriculture website. Before you did that, if somebody said to you that they try to eat only organic food, what does that conjure up in your mind? What were your impressions of what it means for a particular food product to be organic?
Something wasn't modified.
Like not genetically
Yeah, not
modified.
genetically
Okay.
modified.
What else? When you hear the word organic food, organic mustard. Is there such a thing as organic mustard? There must be organic mustard out there somewhere. What comes to mind? Yeah.
Using naturally occurring nutrients.
Oh, there's a lot in there. Unpack that a little for me, Jason.
So I guess most specifically that would be seen in animals, like instead of feeding them the grains and stuff like that, we see in feed houses, maybe doing more of the polyphase farms of they're feeding on grass and seeds and bugs and things that they more naturally would eat.
Okay, so naturally occurring. So part of your deal is natural. In what way is corn not natural?
It is. It just wouldn't typically be in the diet of
A cow,
of a
if
cow.
a cow is living its best life.
Right.
Okay, so natural. Natural is a weird thing. So have you guys ever bought something at the store and it had a label on it that said all natural? What does that mean?
I probably say something that has no chemicals in it.
Well, everything has chemicals in it.
Well,
Table sugar is nothing but sucrose. It's nothing but chemicals. Corn is made up of protein in its seed coat. It's made up of proteins and nucleic acids and carbohydrates, et cetera, et cetera. A corn kernel is nothing but a little packet of chemicals. you're nothing but a big packet of chemicals. Kennedy is a bigger packet of chemicals because he's bigger than us. We're all chemicals. So when you say the word chemical, this door is made up of chemicals, cellulose, a bunch of glucose molecules all strung together. This is chemicals, mainly petroleum chemicals because it's plastic, and then metallic chemicals because it's made out of steel. What do we mean when we use this term all natural relative to food?
Maybe referring to additives, so chemicals that maybe affect flavoring or color or whatever it might be into a product.
So, okay, I just bought some vanilla. We were out of vanilla at the house the other day. And have you guys ever bought vanilla?
Like the actual spice
Yeah, in a bottle, vanilla extract.
or extract?
Yeah,
Yes.
not pods.
Okay.
Have you ever bought vanilla pods?
No.
Oh, well, I mean, you can buy vanilla
No,
pods.
you can make your own. That's what I was asking.
Yeah, if you want to make your own, you can just buy vanilla pods, put them in vodka, and let them steep for
For like a year.
a really long
Yeah.
time. Yeah. The more pods you put in, the stronger your vanilla is. The longer you leave it in there, the stronger it is. But no, I'm just thinking like vanilla extract from the spice aisle. You ever buy that?
Yes.
There are two types of vanilla. What are the two types of vanilla that you can buy in the spice aisle?
French vanilla.
not French vanilla. You can buy vanilla with imitation flavoring. Which are compounds, which are chemicals that are put in the vanilla extract that mimic the flavor of vanilla. Or you can get vanilla that is actually I think this is oftentimes how it's written on the packaging. Pure vanilla, such that all of the flavor of vanilla that you get in there is because somebody stuck a vanilla pod. You guys know where vanilla comes from? What type of plant produces vanilla? It's not a tree. It comes from an orchid. It's actually a seed pod from an orchid species. And so you take a pod of vanilla, you stick it in some alcoholic substance that is going to extract the chemical compounds that make vanilla flavor, and they slowly leach out of the pod into the substance, and then after a while, it finally has leached out enough that actually tastes like vanilla, and then you use that to flavor whatever it is that you're doing. So in one case, they're flavoring vanilla with a compound that is not derived from an orchid pod, an orchid seed pod, but tastes like vanilla. In another case, they're actually using the extracts from an actual orchid seed pod to flavor the vanilla. Now, in both of these cases, are these things natural? Or is one of them unnatural and the other one somehow more natural? I realize you think that I'm spinning out of my mind and I'm losing my mind. I'm like concentrating on little details, but the little details in this case are important. Which of these would be natural versus not natural?
Pure vanilla would be natural and imitation wouldn't be.
So this gets back to me, what do you mean when you say the word natural? Jameson or anyone else?
Original.
Original, okay. That's another way of thinking about it. Original versus imitation. Actually, I think original is much closer to imitation in terms of an antonym than natural versus not natural. Do you see the difficulty here? strictly speaking, if you were to look up the term natural, well, just do it right now. Look up the term natural on your iPads or your phones or whatever. What does it mean to be natural?
Something that comes from nature.
Something that comes from nature. In your dictionary entry, does it give you antonyms to natural? The opposite meanings of natural?
Right. It doesn't right away, but let me see if I can find some.
Yeah, this is a problem with online dictionaries.
I'm getting unnatural, affected, simulated.
Simulated, so the opposite meaning. Okay, what else in terms of antonyms to natural?
Atypical,
Atypical, okay, anything else?
irregular, inconsistent.
Oh, now we're getting pretty far away from
Yeah.
the original meaning of the word natural. Natural is a tricky word. Does the USDA have any labeling requirements in order to put the label natural or all natural on food? Did you run across any of those when you were looking at the USDA website?
It was pretty broad. There wasn't anything as specific as like this.
What do you mean, what was pretty broad?
The way the certification for organic food, the guidelines for that.
Does the certification for organic food say anything about the use of the word natural? It doesn't. Search USDA's website and look for labeling about the word natural. And if you find anything, what you're going to find is that they don't regulate the use of this word. Why?
I'm guessing because it's really hard to define natural.
Actually, it's not really hard to define natural. It's really easy to define natural. Jameson just defined it for us. Something that comes from nature. The imitation flavors that are in imitation vanilla extract, those things come from nature. Corn in the feedstocks of cattle at a concentrated animal feeding operation, those come from nature. There's nothing supernatural about any of these things. A Twinkie is all natural. Twinkie's not necessarily healthy, but a Twinkie is all natural. There's no demon possession in the Twinkie. It is of the physical world. Now, it's a distillation of a lot of food products into this thing that we call the Twinkie, but it's all natural, baby. Nothing supernatural, nothing extraordinarily out of the ordinary about a Twinkie. I would not recommend eating a Twinkie. I would definitely not recommend eating more than one Twinkie. But there's nothing unnatural about it. The wrapper is of nature. The dough, whatever that dough is of nature. The filling, which I think is mainly sugar and oil, vegetable oil, those are all things that come from nature. You could slap the label all natural on a Twinkie and be, one, totally honest with what's in the Twinkie, and also you would be totally within the guidelines of labeling as determined by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Because the US Department of Agriculture has no rules about the label all natural. So the reason that they don't have rules about all natural is because every food product that you buy in the store is technically natural. It is of nature, it is at some point derived from something of nature, which is why they don't regulate it. So you won't find any regulations about this particular tag on your food. So whenever you see the words all natural on a food product at the store, what should you think?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, duh, of course it's natural. Unless they've somehow gotten some demons stuffed inside of there. Or some angels, those would work also. A god or two. The USDA doesn't regulate that term because that term is ludicrous in the context of food. Everything you put in your body is natural. In the same way that you're all natural. You are all natural. You are of the physical world. Unless some of you are gods, which I don't think that's the case. What do you mean by nutrients, Jameson? We've talked about nutrients in this class. I have a really narrow definition of what I think of as nutrients. How are you using the term in this case?
Something that fuels life and growth.
Okay, so in your case, nutrients would include both things like carbohydrates, but would also include things like nitrogen, phosphorus, stuff like that. Am I interpreting you correctly?
I mean, yeah. 'Cause
Okay.
You could get it from somewhere.
Alright. So, basically, I have to make this distinction with my evolution and ecology students, because they think mainly in terms of animals when we talk about the interactions between organisms, and so they think of animals, when we ask them at the very beginning of the semester, what are the 7 things that all organisms need to have in order to kind of get by, survive from day to day, grow up, develop, reproduce, etc. And oftentimes one of the things that they will say is food. And they say food because they're definitely in an animal mindset because they themselves are animals, and so they get everything that they need from food. But food actually provides to an animal 2 things that are important: energy to live, and also nutrients, which are the building blocks of all of these chemical compounds that make up our bodies. The nitrogen-containing compounds in our proteins and our DNA, the carbon compounds that make up all of the structural components of our bodies, things like fats and carbohydrates, phosphorus, which is once again part of our DNA, et cetera, et cetera. So I always try and separate, in my mind, the difference between where energy is coming from and where kind of substance is coming from. So you're melding those together in your treatment of nutrients. And also when you're thinking about this, when you do that, you're thinking mainly about cows and chickens and pigs and things, I think, and not so much about plants. So that's another common conception that you might have about what it means to have organic food. What are some other ideas that you had when you hear the word organic food? Organic bread, organic pasta. You can go to the pasta aisle and you can get Prego and Ragu, or you can get organic pasta sauces. Yeah.
I think like a limited amount of pesticides and herbicides.
So this, once again, applies mainly to what? Plants, crops, or animal crops? Plant
Oh.
crops or animal crops?
Probably plant.
This is mainly about plant crops, all right? What else? comes to mind when you think of the label organic, when you see it in the grocery store?
Marketing.
Well, now you see that. Did you see that before you took the little dive into the USDA's website?
Well, I didn't read the USDA website yet, but
You didn't do your homework? I'm shocked.
I'm
You're a business guy though, right?
yeah.
You think of everything probably in terms of marketing.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, it's a label. Who governs the USDA organic standards? Is it a bunch of scientists?
No, it's probably just politicians.
It's not quite politicians. You guys know the division of the USDA? I've mentioned it before, and you should have noticed this when you went to the USDA website to look at standards if you did that. What section of the, what division of the USDA governs organic standards? None of you went and looked at the organic standards, did you, between Monday and today? Did any of you go and look at the organic standards between Monday and today? Right, go and look at them now. Karen, do you have a phone or computer or something? No. Okay, you can look it up on your phone.
Oh, the Agricultural Marketing Service.
The Agricultural Marketing Service, does that sound like a bunch of scientists? Does that sound like a bunch of politicians? No, it sounds like a bunch of business people, doesn't it? The Agricultural Marketing Service. It's an advertising label. Now, it's an advertising label that has rules attached to it, but it's an advertising label. In the same way that all natural is an advertising label. The difference between saying something is organic versus saying something is all natural is that all natural doesn't have any rules attached to it, whereas the label organic, at least in the United States, has rules attached to it. But it's a part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture that is mainly, that has as its function mainly to deal with the marketing of agricultural products to the American public and to the global market. And they basically view those two markets as kind of separate entities, and the way they advertise to the American market is somewhat different than the way they kind of behave relative to the international market. But it's the Agricultural Marketing Service. When you go and look, there it is right there in the name. As a matter of fact, www.ams.usda.gov. It's its own separate division within the Department of Agriculture. So there are lots of labels on your food. Next time you go to the store, look at the labeling on your food. There's a nutrition label that tells you about how much carbohydrates, how much protein, how much fat is in that food product. Those are required by law. Those are required by actually a different part of the USDA that deals with nutrition. That labeling of the nutritional content of your food dealt with by a different part of the USDA than the labeling that goes on the front of the package as opposed to the back of the package, or the bottom, the underside of the package. So there are a set of standards. There are standards having to do with crops, there are standards having to do with livestock and poultry, and there are standards having to do with the handling of food materials. So, where to go from here? Because I possess all the knowledge and you guys possess very little knowledge because you didn't go and look at this website before you came here. The organic organic standards are not difficult to comprehend. They're written in relatively plain language. You should be capable of absorbing that information without any difficulty. If you don't have your food journal, come and get your food journal. Yes.
How do you use sewage sludge?
People use it as fertilizer. They actually have a machine that will take sewage sludge. So one of the nice things about sewage is it's high in nitrogen and it's high in phosphorus, and both of those products are in limiting supply in soils. And phosphorus, for example, is in limiting supply globally. Most of the phosphorus that we use in fertilizers is actually mined out of phosphorus deposits in sedimentary rocks around the world. Also, you find it in caves where bats go poop. Bat guano is very high in phosphorus. Certain oceanic islands have basically harvested the phosphorus from the guano from seabirds that nest on their islands to the point that they've basically reduced their islands almost all the way down to sea level because they've mined the phosphorus buildups on those islands that in some cases resemble small mountains because of hundreds of thousands of years of seabirds roosting on these islands. And there's actually a whole series of articles on, once again, on NPR about the peak phosphorus and the global decline in phosphate supplies, which threaten agriculture. So back when we talked about nutrient cycling, we could have talked about phosphorus as a nutrient. We didn't because it's a relatively simple nutrient, but it's one of those nutrients that doesn't change forms very much, and it's actually found mostly in sedimentary rock. And as we mine that, it's kind of like oil. As you mine it, there's just less and less of it to be mined in the future. And there's a long return cycle for that stuff to become available to humans again, once it's been used. For oil and natural gas and coal, it takes millions and millions and millions of years of being compressed and heated in rock in order to convert organic material in plants to coal. In the same way, it takes forever for phosphate to settle to the bottom of the ocean, for those ocean sediments to become rock, for those rocks then to be pushed up through tectonic activity to become dry land again. And so phosphorus is one of those things that we're eventually going to deplete. Do you guys know what peak oil is? It's this idea that for any nation that has oil reserves, you can plot time and you can plot, number of barrels extracted, for example. And early on in the discovery of any natural resource, you have relatively low increases in the amount of that substance that is around because it's a newly discovered substance that has new uses, et cetera, et cetera. Because it's new, there aren't a ton of uses, and also because it's new, we don't really know how to get it out of the ground very easily. This is the way it was with oil. But with time, people find uses for substances as they become available, and we also get better at extracting those things. And so the rate of increase of the availability of the product becomes more and more available because we have more and more uses for it, and we also get better and better at extracting it. But there comes a point where we have found all of the easy to get to oil, and now oil becomes more difficult to extract because all the easy pools of oil we've gotten to, and now we have to go to things like tar sands and things like this, where the oil is more difficult to get to, and as a result, the production of oil each year begins to go down, and where this peak occurs is referred to as peak oil. And because petroleum products are really important to the American economy, the Energy Information Administration has been tracking the production of oil for years and years. Do you guys have any idea of when the United States hit peak oil? None of you guys are going into commodity trading, I don't guess, when you grow up with your business degrees. What are you going to do with your business degree?
Like immediately?
Yeah, when you graduate.
I'm not exactly sure. I mean, the goal would be down to business one
oil occurred in the United States back in 1975. It declined. It's not nearly this low yet. It declined for a while, and then it increased again when we started extracting oil effectively from tar sands using methods like fracking. But oil production is steadily declining over time, and it's because we have extracted the big, easy to get to deposits that we have control over. You guys know what Biden did recently having to do with oil supply? Evil Biden. Biden, Democrats should not be doing things like this.
And my guess is just lifted regulations.
He didn't. He tapped into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to bring down gas prices. So while we got rid of the ever-normal granary where food is concerned, there's a similar thing called the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is basically a large pool of stored raw crude oil that basically the government buys up each year from petroleum extractors and basically stores in big tanks full of oil. And it just sits there because oil doesn't go bad, which is one of the nice things about it. And at times when there's a national need for higher production of oil, the government can release that onto the market. And usually that is seen as a negative thing because we want to keep that petroleum reserve around in the event that we ever go to war with some Middle Eastern country that we rely on heavily for oil, like Saudi Arabia. And so it's good to have that reserve in place. And so it's usually viewed fairly negatively when a president opts to tap that reserve, which is what Biden just did last week, mainly to bring down oil prices, which will ultimately bring down gas prices. Why would a president want to tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve? Yeah, Aiden.
You don't lose re-election.
Yeah, because you want your party to get reelected in 2022, and guess what people feel first in terms of the economic pinch?
Gas prices.
Gas prices and food prices, because every week or every couple of days you buy gas, every week you buy food. If you're paying more for gas and food, you generally blame the people who are in charge, the people who are in power on that situation. And so for purely political gain, Biden has tapped the petroleum reserve, which I get why he's doing it. I don't necessarily agree with the fact that he has done it. I voted for Biden. I can disagree with the guy I voted for because I think it's a douche move. Tapping something that was set up for a particular purpose and then using it for another purpose, we shouldn't really do that. I have criticisms of virtually every president that has ever served while I've been alive and paying attention to presidents. Peak oil represents the turning point at which point we need to start finding alternative ways of doing energy, because that's a sign that easy oil is gone, harder oil is what we're relying on. That harder oil is going to be extracted, and then we get to the really hard oil to extract, and it's just going to become more and more difficult over time. And a similar curve can be drawn, although it is for a shorter time period and is less complete, for phosphorus supplies. So you can look at the amount of phosphorus that is being produced every year, and it has also reached its peak, and we're in decline where phosphorus is concerned. The bad thing about phosphorus is that there aren't alternatives for phosphorus like there are for energy from oil and other petroleum products, oil and coal and natural gas. There aren't substitutes for phosphorus. Every living organism needs phosphorus, and so people should be as concerned or more concerned about the fact that we've passed peak phosphorus at a global scale. So one of the ways of getting around short phosphorus supplies is you can take sewage sludge. When you go to the bathroom, a lot of what you poop is basically filled with phosphorus. You can take that sewage sludge, you can haul it across the country, and you can basically, there's an attachment that goes on the back of your tractor. It has a big tank of the sewage sludge, and it has this drum that has these narrow metal pokey things that stick out. What it is basically is a thin cylinder with a pointed end, and it's an injector, and as it rolls through the field, it injects, pokes this injector down into the soil a certain depth, and then it injects a little bit of this sewage sludge, and it essentially puts nitrogen and phosphorus back into the soil. That's a no-no for for organic crops. You want to be getting your nitrogen and phosphorus from less potentially disgusting sources. There are actually, this was a big controversy a couple of years ago because the city of New York, because it has so many people, is a major producer of sewage sludge. Guess who major consumers of sewage sludge are?
People in more rural areas of the country.
Yes, people in the Midwest in particular. So how does the sewage sludge get from New York City to the Midwest, to Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska?
Trucks.
Not on trucks, but that's a good answer. Thank God it's not on trucks. A more reliable, less prone to crash method comes on trains. A couple of years ago, a bunch of states like Pennsylvania and Ohio and Kentucky and places like that woke up one day and realized that there were trainloads and trainloads and trainloads of sewage sludge going across their states from big cities on the East Coast to the Midwest. And they got a little bit upset about that, mainly because one of them derailed. And when it derailed, guess what happened? Robbie, you looks like you have an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tanks ruptured and sewage sludge went everywhere. It actually went into a river and basically compromised the environment around this little town. I forget what state it was in. And then all of a sudden, all these states were like, where'd that sewage sludge come from? Well, the same place it's been going for all of this time. And then a bunch of regulations were passed on the safe shipping of sewage sludge and things like this. If you're hauling petroleum on a train, you put that petroleum in special tanks on the train. They're double walled, so if something happens to the outer wall, there's an inner wall that continues to protect it to keep it from leaking out and causing fires and environmental damage, et cetera, et cetera. Those kinds of regulations are now in place for things like sewage sludge, which weren't in place before this derailment. So sewage sludge is just a way of putting nutrients back into the soil if you are on a non-organic producing farm. And it gets into the soil through these injectors. And if you've ever been out to a farm, a large commercial farm, and you've been in a farmer's barn, you've probably seen this apparatus for doing this injection. All right, let's end early. Go read the organic standards so that I can talk to you about the organic standards, because I could just tell you what the organic standards are, but I would much rather talk to you about what the organic standards are and have you be able to make comments about it. If you haven't picked up your food journals in the past, they are on the table there, and go read. Use the remaining 20 minutes to read. Do I have yours?
I think so.
I don't think so. All right. Well, I handed them back, and I gathered up everything that I had in my office this morning.
When did you hand them back?
It's probably a week and a half ago.
Oh, okay, then that's all right.
I think you do have yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why is it late? Why did you not come to class on that? Yes, I'll take it, but,
Thank you.
but there's another paper coming up, get that one in on time.
And you also could have just emailed it to me if you weren't gonna be in class.
Yeah, I saw the printing.
Oh yeah, that's mainly because I don't wanna read an electronic version of it, but yeah, I could have printed it off for myself.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mine was, I think I might have already gotten mine, right?
I think so, yeah, I picked it up last time. Last time I brought them to class.
Okay. See you on Friday.
See you.